We continue with our special series on Al Gore's upcoming movie about global warming. Does the mainstream media have an agenda when it comes to reporting on the environment? Joining us now is the director of the Business and Media Institute, Dan Gaynor, and the author of The Heat Is On, journalist Ross Gelbspan. Dan, let me start with you. It's interesting to me that the people coming out against Gore and all the money that is going to combat Gore's position on global warming comes from the fossil fuel industry, ExxonMobil, Ford, and people who have financial interest not to move forward with reducing poisonous emissions. How about that?
Well, that's when you talk about all the money, that's really kind of ridiculous. The amount of money that's spent on global warming research is just enormous.
Why not research it?
Well, because, of course, it's all being used to push one position. And then the fossil fuel industry gets abused by people like Mr. Gelbspan for daring to actually challenge anything the other side says, and then he calls them criminals against humanity.
Well, they have a financial interest, don't they, in promoting their economic well-being, and so we know what their motivation is to go against the things that Al Gore says.
But that doesn't invalidate the science that is on the other side, as much as Mr. Gelbspan might assault a lot of scientists like Pat Michaels you had on last night.
Well, let's talk about well, Pat Michaels also has ties to the energy industry. He's got financial interest there, too. But let's talk about some of the science that you just mentioned. Glaciers are melting. New heat records are being set. We've already started to see extreme weather patterns. We've seen the melting of glaciers in Greenland. Do we ignore all that and make believe it's not happening?
Well, you don't have to make believe it's not happening, but this isn't anything new. We looked at media coverage for this for more than 110 years. And in fact,
I didn't know we had media that long ago.
Yes, we have. In fact, what we found is a lot of the media they're telling us, what we're telling us that we're having global warming now are the same people who were telling us we had an ice age in the 70s, warming back in the middle of the century, or another ice age going back as 1895.
Let me go to Mr. Gelbspan. Mr. Gelbspan, we've definitely seen an increase in some of these incidents. Weather changes, meteorological changes, earth changes, that's really happened of late, hasn't it?
Absolutely. There's been a big increase in intense and extremely destabilizing weather events over the last 30 years or so. They're increasing in frequency and intensity, and they're definitely correlated with the increase in greenhouse gases and burning of coal and oil. That's basically what this is due to.
And Mr. Gaynor, we've seen that sea level risings have doubled in the past decade because of melting glaciers, thermal expansion of warming oceans. Siberian and Alaskan tundras are thawing, releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. These are all recent developments. They're not 100 years old, what we're talking about here.
Well, what he's talking about are all the extreme events that he claims are actually linked to global warming. In fact, he wants all journalists included every time they do a story on anything involving weather. But one of the reporters, in fact, the only reporter that he disagrees with, or he agrees with, is Andrew Revkin from the New York Times. And even Revkin says that that's not realistic.
Hey, Dan, Sean Hannity, thanks for being with us. You know, it's sort of ironic to me because if you go back and you look at, like, the first Earth Day, they're holding up signs saying that, you know, the next ice age is coming. And now it's developed and evolved into the global warming. But what I guess what I see as consistent is this desire to create panic among the American people, and it seems to be based on faulty science. Am I correct here?
Well, that's the question. I mean, when you had Pat Michaels on last night, he said certainly that there's been a little bit of warming. But there's been warming throughout history. And, you know, when we have people who, like Mr. Gelbspan, who are just highlighting every extreme that even the scientists don't say are accurate, then he's not helping the debate any, and the media are marching in lockstep with people like Al Gore.
You know something, Mr. Ross, I guess I'd be more open to hearing Al Gore's arguments, but when I look through the book that is associated with the movie that he now has coming out, it's back to Al Gore's typical, predictable, knee-jerk attacks against the Bush administration and Republicans. It's just like him screaming at the top of his lungs that George Bush betrayed his country. You know, he seems like a guy that is so bitter, so lacking in any objectivity, I don't think he could be taken seriously. Why should we take him seriously?
I think it's a very interesting point, but I don't think we need to depend on Al Gore. I think it's very interesting that William F. Buckley has said this is not an Al Gore issue. We're burning too many greenhouse gases for the planet to accommodate. Jim Woolsey, former head of the CIA, and Senator Richard Lugar from Indiana are very concerned about it. They've written about it. Paul O'Neill, the first Treasury Secretary in the Bush administration, has likened the coming impacts of global warming to a nuclear holocaust, and the senator taking the lead in trying to regulate these emissions is conservative Senator John McCain. So this is not an Al Gore issue.
Well, it is an Al Gore issue because Al Gore's bringing it to the forefront, and I think he's trying to scare a lot of people with his movie, and I think a lot of it's based on his politics. But how do the American people take this global warming movement seriously when you can see the signs 30 years ago at the first Earth Day that an ice age is coming? And it seems to be the same political movement that goes from one extreme to the other. You know, people then, you know, are very skeptical of the science behind this.
I think 30 years ago, scientists became aware of the instability, the growing instability of the climate, and they were worried about an ice age or about extreme heat. Since then, the science has become much stronger, and to put it in perspective, I think it's very interesting to note the science says that to stabilize the climate, we need to cut our emissions by 70%. That is the unanimous finding of more than 2,000 scientists. And look at what the response is in Europe. Holland is now cutting emissions by 80% in 40 years. Tony Blair
I
is
think we've hit on a point here.
60%.
Dan, a lot of people say that when people say that they've got an agenda.
They would not be doing that if they had any
agenda.
doubts about the science.
They want us to be driving Yugos and a Honda Prius or a Toyota Prius rather than another car, that there's another agenda guiding their science. It's a political agenda. Is that true in the short time we have, Dan?
Of course it's true, and it's also being driven by the media. They want to stifle debate. Mr. Gelbspan wants to stifle debate. Personally,
We're having a debate. We got to run, though, unfortunately. We thank you both very much for being with us. Ross and Dan, we thank you very much for your time.